And hello, and welcome back to my multi-part series on the albums of Yes. If you watched my previous one about 90125, then I explained there that I'm reviewing Yes's albums in the context of the order. That was wordy. It was terrible. But I'm reviewing them in the order in which I was introduced to these albums, because I think that has a significant effect on the way I viewed each album. And I think anybody who's a fan of Yes or any other band like Pink Floyd, any band that has kind of a large catalog, there's just certain ways you approached it, and that approach guides your opinions, at least on some level. So, why did I eat right before I did this video? Anyways, as I mentioned before, 90125 was a big deal for me. I was in choir, and I thought the textures, especially in the vocals, just really spoke to me. I didn't think a whole lot about Yes after that, except I really liked 90125, and I had 9012 Live, the Solos album, which I'll eventually review. I guess I should insert that in here somewhere, since that was the next one I heard. But that's not a proper album, and I'm trying to approach the proper albums first. So, a year or maybe even two went by. At least a year. I met a friend, Mike, and he played guitar, and he was seriously into the Beatles. And he wasn't a great guitarist, but he was a good guitarist, and he was a pretty good natural songwriter. So, I started wanting to learn to play the guitar. So I took my dad's guitar and restrung it, because he's left-handed. I restrung it to right hand and started picking out some. My dad had some music books, and I learned quickly that you could copy, the chords. So I was playing some Hank Williams songs and Willie Nelson songs, which probably doesn't sound like something great to a person, in a discussion of progressive rock. But even to this day, Hank Williams is pretty damn good. And I just started learning to play chords. So it was in this context that he was playing me some music he made on a reel-to-reel. Does anybody else out there remember the reel-to-reel? This big reel-to-reel. This was his dad's, and he'd been making this music on it. And at the end of the end of the tape, or the end of his recording, came on whatever was on before, and it was this song. And I recognized the singer. I said, "That's the guy from Yes." And he said, "Yeah, that song's by Yes." I said, "What's it called? I've never heard it before." Yeah, it was I don't know if I should give it away or not. It had a lot of acoustic sounds in it. It had a lot of vocal layers that I'm used to. The production, of course, was 70s production, so it didn't sound like Trevor Horn's production. And the song seemed to be about a chess game, as near as I could tell. But I loved the vocal arrangements, and I liked John Anderson's voice. Again, it's probably my choir boy background that led to that. And I said, "Well, what's this song called?" Now keep in mind, we didn't have the beginning of the song. Didn't even have the ending of the song, just had like the middle. And it had an organ in there. I loved that. And I was just like, okay, I dig this song. And he had no clue. He knew it was Yes, and he had heard it, but he didn't know what it was called. So I went on this quest. This is before the internet. This is before YouTube. This is before anything. I'm on my own. It's an adventure. And I will say this. Discovering Yes music was an adventure back then, because you couldn't go look up references. And some of the albums had already gone, a few of the albums had already gone out of print. I had to go search for them somewhere. So, I was at a Caldor. If anybody has a history of Massachusetts, living in Massachusetts or East Coast, you may remember Caldor. It was kind of like Target. They had a really good music selection, though. Matter of fact, back then, I'm going to go on a tirade here. Back then, the stores had really decent record selections. And they had a bunch of Yes albums. The classic Yes. They had 90125, because that was a huge hit. I'm trying to remember what else they had, but this one, the cover caught my attention. I knew it was an older classic album. So let's start with Fragile. Now first, what drew me, of course, was this wonderful artwork by Mr. Roger Dean, who would become really a collaborator with the band, in the sense of the artwork and the music really begin to match up. especially with the next album, Close to the Edge. I can't imagine that album having any other cover. So I got Fragile, and I was hoping that song would be on here. Well, it wasn't. But it had some great stuff. First off, we started off with Roundabout, which I have to admit I didn't just completely love when I first heard. It was kind of it seemed a little dense musically. I wasn't used to it. But I grew to like it pretty quick. So, Fragile, of course, in retrospect, we know that it's, I believe, 4 songs, 4 proper yes songs, and then little solo pieces. Part of this was done because they just hired a guy named Rick Wakeman to be their keyboardist, and they had to get a bunch of equipment. So, rather than talk about Roundabout just yet, so I started listening to it. Like I said, Roundabout, I didn't hate it at all. It wasn't like I didn't like it. At the time, I couldn't get into it. Cans and Brahms, which is, of course, from Brahms' 4th Symphony. I really enjoyed this. Now, I had not heard Emerson, Lake and Palmer at this point, or what other artists were doing with classical themes, but I just liked the whole idea of taking a piece of classical music and playing it out on keyboards. To me, that was kind of cool. So I liked it, and I know Wakeman doesn't like it. A lot of people don't like it. I still enjoy it. We Have Heaven was John Anderson. I really liked that it was multi-layered vocals, and it was a very simple melody, but he just kept layering vocal upon vocal, and reminded me a little bit of Leave It, like a less commercially viable version of Leave It. Matter of fact, let's talk about this. Just focus on the solo selections. 5% for Nothing by Bill Bruford. Very short, very loopy. It's gone before you know it. I honestly don't have any opinion of it other than it's there. The Fish, of course, is Chris Squire's bass tour de force. At the time, I think I was just learning guitar and I'd been in choir, but I really hadn't thought about the instrumentation of a song and how bass fills a certain, generally, at least in rock music, bass fills a certain section in the rhythm, and drums, and then guitar and keyboard, piano carry on certain melody lines and themes, and then you have the lead vocal. So I didn't realize how much this really just broke that open, and it had Chris Squire building a texture out of a single instrument. Mood for a Day was the one that really got me, though, because that was Steve Howe. And up to this point, I'd listened to Trevor Rabin, of course, in 90125, who was a fine guitarist. I'm not going to sit here I know a lot of people like to bash Rabin. He's actually a very good guitarist. But Mood for a Day was something different. I had never heard nylon string classical guitar before. And it kind of woke my eyes up. Opened my ears to the concept of a rock musician doing something that's really not what we expect from a rock musician. To this day, I play Mood for a Day on a guitar, nowhere near as good as Steve. I always make mistakes right in the last third. I just start falling apart for some reason. I'm sure it has something to do with I never practice Mood for a Day. I just once in a while play it. So back to the songs. Roundabout I already discussed briefly. I really liked Roundabout. Couldn't figure out what the hell it was about, but I liked it. It grew on me. I began to really appreciate the bass drum interplay as I became more, I don't want to say I ever became a musician. I just played guitar. But I began to, started off this idea of really listening to how a song's put together and how the music works together and how the instruments work together as compositions. South Side of the Sky is a song I kind of skipped originally. Probably I had this album for like a year or two. I just kind of, it seemed Zeppelin-ish to me. And at the time I was anti-Zeppelin. In retrospect, I'm not sure. There's still an aspect of it. I mean, I could still picture that as a Zeppelin song, but it really is a Yes song. It's just a little bit darker than you used to. Yes's music tends to be really on the positive side, and this is really a song about a bunch of guys freezing to death in the Arctic. So, Long Distance Runaround is their, what you might call, pop song off the album. Still has some great rhythm and great little segments in it, but it's definitely a shorter structure, and it's just a little more radio friendly, I think. And since then I have heard it once in a while pop up on the radio. And then we get to really the first time I heard Yes do it, and it just big song, and that's Heart of the Sunrise, a fan favorite. I'm sure there's some fan out there that absolutely hates Heart of the Sunrise. I haven't met that person yet. First off, the song just explodes out of the speaker, and that's one thing. That's what I remember about it. Just that, and then Rick Wakeman with his little keyboard. It just moved, and then you get to these John Anderson lyrics. John Anderson lyrics are, you can't figure out what the heck he's singing about half the time, and yet he's able to elicit an emotional response, at least from me. A lot of this I really understood. I was a teenager. Teenagers go through a lot of emotional moods, and you kind of feel you're trying to fit in. You're trying to, and really I had moved from being kind of in the country in Washington State to Massachusetts, which I wasn't in a big city, but it was a big city. It was more of a city life compared to what I lived in Vancouver, Washington. So that whole lost in the city thing just really kind of spoke to me. It's like I don't know what this song is about, but I get it. He gets me. John Anderson gets me. Heart of the Sunrise is still, we're talking about something I listened to in the 80, 84, 85 maybe, and that song just still brings chills to my spine. I just absolutely adore it. So this is a great album. The solo pieces are a bit on the ephemeral side overall, especially Anderson's, especially Bruford. And I think Bruford just put his together because, well, everybody else says, hey, we all have to contribute a solo piece. It's still kind of an interesting piece, but it sounds like something that would have popped up in Topographic Oceans a few years later. The songs are outstanding. Roundabout, South Side of the Sky. Now, I consider it an underappreciated classic piece of Yes. And it has gotten more respect over the years. It's held up well. Long Distance Runaround, still basically a pop song, but very good pop song, very listenable, very enjoyable. And then Heart of the Sunrise, which just kicks ass. Okay? So, this is a great album. And I would heartily recommend this particular album to somebody who hasn't really listened to Yes, thinks progressive rock is just kind of bloated, pretentious crap. You should give some of these songs a try. Yeah, they require you to sit down and listen to them, and in that sense, for rock music, they're almost rebellious because of that. And eventually, yes, many of these bands become bloated. I think that's a fair complaint about them later on. As for the Rhino 2003 remaster, it has a rough mix of Roundabout, which is one of those things that you listen to and say, that's interesting. I don't think I'll ever listen to that again. It's just nothing substantial. And this one is, of all the bonus ones, this is one of the weakest. But it does have the full-length version of America, which most Yes fans have heard. It's been on different compilations. And their version of America is actually awesome. It would fit very well on this album, so I don't mind it being there. And other than that, there's not much to say about this except this gorgeous artwork by Roger D. This was the first time Roger had worked with the band, and it really kind of solidified his style. He had been doing albums and various art before this, but I don't know, they just go together perfectly. Yes's music and Roger Dean's covers. And when he doesn't have, matter of fact, when it doesn't have a Roger Dean cover, fans start to worry. Going for the Ones, Tormato are perfect examples. So, another great album by Yes. Am I going to call them all great? Am I going to sit here and explain how they're all awesome and excellent? No, there's some bad ones coming up. But, for the moment, 90125 is a great rock pop album with a lot of good vocals, and now we're up to Fragile, a great collection of progressive rock tunes. Thanks again.